Son, and Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
I'm going to speak to you guys today about something that's really important, something that is a particular problem for us modern people. And it's something that many of us struggle with, especially you young folk. This is something that can and does cause incredible amount of anxiety and pain. And God willing, today the path won't be as anxious, won't be as painful. But you have to understand that the path, nevertheless, is something that you have to walk. I want to talk to you today about the distinction between something called occupation and vocation. Occupation and vocation. I'm going to read this last part of the epistle again today to give us context, okay? So St. Paul, he says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works." So created in Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand, that we should walk in that. Polema is the word, and so God has created us to be these vessels. He's created us specifically to do good works. That's why we exist. And so, this issue of occupation versus vocation, you can understand it in this way. The occupation is what you do. Vocation is what you are. Occupation is kind of what you do in the world, let's say. Occupation is something that you do for your job. And vocation is your calling. Okay? Everyone will have an occupation of some kind, and this is what everyone, especially young people, are stressing over. What am I going to do with my life? What kind of work am I going to do? How am I going to pay bills? But this part that most people don't know about, and they leave off, and they oftentimes, unfortunately, ignore, is what is their vocation? So for me, in my life, I'm very fortunate and I'm blessed, thanks be to God. But my occupation and my vocation are one and the same. My vocation is I'm called to be a priest, and that's also by God's good blessing and by all of your good giving, thank you. That's also my occupation. Those two things work together. Now, that won't always be the case, and for most people that actually won't be the case, and that's okay. Because in fact, your vocation will find itself being spread out more if it's not the same as your occupation. Let me give you an example. So God has been merciful to me, and He's given me a lot of good opportunities to share my love of God with other people. And when my occupation was different than my vocation, in some ways I reached more people. Because I wasn't in the church, I wasn't ministering to just my flock. Back when I was a tattoo artist, it was in the shop, and when I was a caseworker, it was in the social service ministry. So my reach was more. The calling went out further. Because my occupation was different than my vocation. So what you need to understand is, don't worry so much about your occupation. Don't worry so much about occupation, especially you young people who are moving up in school, getting ready to graduate, figuring out what you're going to do. I know it sounds crazy, and you may say that's easy for you to say, but I was once there. I'm telling you, don't worry so much about your occupation. Start understanding what your vocation is. Your vocation is why God has created you and why God has called you. God has called you for good works. Okay? If you're not quite getting it, let me go to the gospel to give you an understanding. So in the gospel today, we had a lawyer. And the lawyer, because he had money, thieves fell upon him and robbed him and beat him. Okay? So, who passes by? We have a priest, and we have a Levite. So let me give you guys some understanding. All priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests. All priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests. What that means is, all the priests prior to the priesthood of Christ were Levites. You're pulled from that tribe. So they had both vocation and occupation. The Levite was called separate from the rest of the tribes. That was their vocation. Their vocation was to know who God is, what his demands were. And oftentimes their occupation was to perform those sacrifices. So priest and Levite, occupation, vocation, both of them did not do what they were supposed to do. And in fact, the ironic and the painful thing is the Samaritan, who is neither a priest, nor a Levite, nor really even a Jew. So the Samaritan, who was an outsider, the Samaritan who was the unclean, if you were, the Samaritan who was the one who didn't belong, he was the one who was aware of his vocation. Because he knew what to do. He cared for the man. He did the good work. This is why God has created you, for good work. Oftentimes your occupation may reveal your vocation to you in a greater way, but make no mistake, you are unsatisfied in your life, and you will find yourself unsatisfied when you confuse your occupation with your vocation. Because your occupation cannot and will not satisfy you, and in fact, it will drive you crazy. It will drive you crazy. Vocation, however, will bring you peace. It will bring you joy. It will bring you fulfillment. It will bring you love. It will bring you wisdom. It will bring you all those things. Your vocation is for good works. You may be a mechanic, but your vocation is to be a good brother. You may be a paralegal, but your vocation is to be a good sister. Your occupation may be to be a soldier, but your vocation is to be a father. Your occupation may be to be a teacher, but your vocation is to be a loving, nurturing mother. And regardless of what you're doing, your vocation is to be a child of God, made for good works, to bring healing and love and joy and mercy in the world. And if you think that sounds flowery, let me tell you something. If you're working at Quick Trip, that person who you're seeing down and just down, day in and day out, you being kind to them at one time, that could be the difference between them having suicidal thoughts that day or not. If you are working as a secretary and you think that this is nothing, your good work and you helping your boss keep things in line, that may make the difference between 20 people having their jobs and 20 people losing their jobs. You don't know. You don't know. So, pay attention to your vocation. Know that you're there for good works. And that will make your occupation what it should be. Fulfilling. Right? But it won't be the other way around. Pay attention to what God has called you to do. And more importantly, pay attention to what God has called you to be. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.